Welcome, welcome to the evening show with Jackie Brambles. Our opening track may well have tipped you off as to who is joining us this evening. Thunder in the Mountains got to number 4 in 1981 for someone who has been referred to often as the punk princess. She's also an actress whose latest film, Weightless, just won runner-up at the Brighton Film Festival, but most recently she and her esteemed musician husband, Robert Fripp, have been thrilling online audiences with their raucous and theatrical kitchen concert performances called Sunday Lunch. It's been so hugely successful, with over 70 million streams, that they're about to take it out on the road once they've wrapped up a very busy summer festival, which included playing Rewind South yesterday. Always a pleasure to talk to Toyah.
Hello, how are you, Jackie?
I'm well. It's been a while since last we spoke, but you have not slowed down, I can see.
Yeah, it's been very, very good, and it's getting very, very exciting. It's a fantastic looking year.
I'll say. You and Robert have had such huge success with Sunday Lunch that you're not now going to take it out on the road as Toyah and Robert's Sunday Lunch Rock Party for a full UK tour starting at the end of September in Wimborne, after a very busy summer of festivals, which included the Isle of Wight and Glastonbury. I mean, it's been a bonkers schedule.
I know, it's ramped.
And all this off the back of very suddenly being called upon to join Billy Idol on his UK tour at the tail end of last year. How did that come about?
Well, it was a complete surprise. It was a phone call out of the blue, because I believe that Billy Idol's roadside tour was originally supposed to happen before lockdown. So it's a rescheduled tour. And I do know that the Go-Go's were going to be opening for him. So obviously everyone's plans change. And I just got a phone call saying, would I like to do it? And, would I like to do it? I mean, do you have to ask me that? Billy Idol, absolute legend.
Didn't you do a Billy Idol number on YouTube? Didn't you do a Billy Idol song?
Oh yeah, for the past 20 years I've been doing Rebel Yell in my set list. But yeah, I adore his work. But I first came across him in the punk movement for Generation X.
Of course.
So that's 45 years ago. Last night I did a dancer, came dancing to my door.
Billy Idol, Rebel Yell, one of the many numbers you can see Toyah and her husband Robert Fripp perform for their Sunday Lunch Rock Party UK tour, which kicks off at the end of September. There's still a few more festivals to play before that, though. I know you're in Newark and Durham soon. Let's talk about this plethora of festivals that have sprung up all over the country, mainly in celebration of 80s music, including all three of our own Rewinds. What are your thoughts on this particular era that we grew up in, being so joyously celebrated now?
It's really exciting that these festivals specialize in certain areas and times in the history of music. And we all know that 80s music is a huge, massive movement again. I look out over audiences at Let's Rock, and I'm looking at 20-year-olds, and they know every lyric of every song I'm doing. It's really nice that after 45 years in the music business that I can still work the genres that I have been in that whole history of my life.
And isn't it interesting to I was trying to think, are we sort of being rose-coloured spectacly about it because it's the era where we sort of came of age? But I don't think so. I think it's unique because, I know that when I was 20, I wasn't at concerts of, artists that my folks loved, and I didn't know all the words. There wasn't that same connection for the next generation.
It's very interesting because I grew up in the 60s, and my parents were horrified at what was going on in the 60s because I had a sister who was 8 years older than me. And I remember her bringing home a Mary Quant mini dress, and my mother marching her back to the shop and demanding the money back because her daughter will not be wearing that dress. And when I was driving, my mother used to have to drive me to school or I wouldn't go. I was that rebellious. And I just remember on the radio, you only heard the Beatles. Then towards the end of the 60s, you started to hear Jimi Hendrix, and my mother was horrified. And then in 1970, I learned about T-Rex, David Bowie, Alice Cooper, and there was no holding me back. The kind of rush of music and music genres suddenly taking off happened at the prime of my teenage years.
When we got no choice.
Number one in 1972, and most certainly flipping a switch in a teenage Toyah's brain. That's Alice Cooper with School's Out. And we will be back with more Tales from Toyah in our great conversation coming up next. Welcome back to the evening show with Jackie Brambles, where it's just you, me, and tonight's special guest, Toyah, cozying on in for a great conversation and doing a deep dive into some of her most meaningful musical memories. So let's kick off then, Toyah, with the first record that you ever bought.
Well, the first record I ever bought was probably Ride a White Swan, T-Rex. But I was brought up on Disney songs and band songs, Elvis Presley, Tommy Steele, Cliff Richards, really respectable family artists.
Right.
So when men started wearing makeup, my family became very divided by it all.
And I know which side you landed on.
Oh, yes.
How about, is there a particular artist or song that reminds you of either a first live gig you ever saw?
Oh, yeah.
Or, a bit of teenage rebellion? Who would that be for you?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I used to break into gigs. I was just a very free-spirited teenager. So by the time I was 11, I'd already seen Black Sabbath, Hawkwind, and quite a few others. I think even Uriah Heep.
Wow.
Yeah. And I didn't understand what was going on, and no one understood why there was a child in the audience. But the first ticket I ever bought was Mark Bolan of T-Rex. And I was on the front row of the Birmingham Odeon, just screaming my head off, refusing to stay in the seat. I can remember being hit on the back of the head by security, telling me to sit down. But Mark Bolan was sitting cross-legged, no further than 10 feet away from me. And I just absolutely fell in love with that. So I owned Ride a White Swan, Electric Warrior.
Ride it all out like a bird in the sky. Let's ride it all out like you know.
Ride a White Swan by T-Rex, the first record bought by Toyah, and the first gig that truly blew your mind as well. And actually, you are amongst many artists I talk to that cite Mark Bolan as being a pivotal figure in their own early musical evolution. Why do you think that is?
There was such a revolution after Mark Bolan, as if he opened the floodgates, because then we started to get Ziggy Stardust, early Roxy Music, who I've all seen live. I saw Ziggy Stardust at Coventry New Theatre.
Wow.
And I was probably one of only 3 people screaming, with a very sophisticated audience wanting to listen. And I can remember I was irritating the audience greatly. And when Bowie walked off stage, I ran to the stage door, and I was there as he got in his limo.
Oh, wow.
And I was going, David! I must have been so obnoxious.
Did he give you a smile or a wave?
Did, and Mick Ronson did as well.
Oh, I mean, I'm sure they appreciate that. I mean, how do you feel about that now as an artist when you sort of, have had that sort of absolutely, wild enthusiasm and adoration from fans, passion that knows no bounds? How does you feel as a performer?
I feel a lot more comfortable with who and what I am today. When it all started to go like that, it was uncontrollable. And I can remember one show at Birmingham Odeon where the stage was invaded at least 20 times. And my parents and family were up in the balcony, on the front row of the balcony. And they said they felt utterly terrified and powerless. So in the punk era, when that used to happen and you didn't have anyone see it happen because no one had cameras in the gig, you know, it was exciting.
Of course.
It was exclusive. It was in the moment. But soon as cameras started to appear, the hysteria became a very different beast, because people do literally get you in headlocks and film you and film roughing up your hair or kissing you on the mouth or stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
It's a very different type of hysteria, but it is everything I ever wanted. And the first time I experienced it on a level that the Beatles must have had every day of their lives was at the Ipswich Gaumont, when I was delivered to the theatre for the show an hour early. And I thought, what's that noise? There was just this roar, this noise. And I left my dressing room and walked closer to the stage, and I realized that the noise was 3,000 people chanting my name for an hour. And it was exhilarating. But you've got to remember, back in 1981, you couldn't phone anyone and say, have a listen to this. Yeah. You experienced it all on your own. And it was just breathtaking.
It's a Mystery, Toyah's debut hit single, which got to number 4 in 1981 as part of the 4 from Toyah EP, which effectively turned you into a pop star. And when you were sort of breaking through, Toyah, when you were starting to get real traction and attention at the very, very start of that sort of public life, were there peers around you that you sort of looked to and thought, either, oh yeah, they're handling it well, that's how I want to do it, or you know, on the other side of things, that looks like a nightmare, I don't want to do that?
I never thought that it would be a nightmare, never. It was everything I ever wanted. I came from a background where no one gave me any credit, and I think this is why I was so rebellious. I was very, very small. Everyone patted me on the head and said, you know, dreams of being a rock star and an actress aren't going to happen to you. So I had a lot to prove, and I just went through a series of very lucky events that catapulted me into the glitterati of show business. I got spotted on the streets of Birmingham because I had yellow and green hair, and I was asked to come and audition with the BCAT brothers for a half-hour drama on BBC Two about a young girl breaking into the Top of the Pops studios to sing 2 of her songs. I got the part, I wrote the songs, ended up being invited to the National Theatre. So within 3 months of all of this happening, I was working with the biggest stars in the world.
Wow.
And I'd had no experience whatsoever. Oof. But what I learned very quickly was these stars were stalked. I was working with Warren Clark. I was being directed by Maximilian Schell, the superstar German film star. And I realized that people waiting out stage door were not kind of gentle, friendly people. They were obsessives. And I saw it all in front of me at the age of 18. And it was a big eye-opener. But at the same time, I wanted the fame that I saw Bowie get, that I saw Bolan get, Alice Cooper. I saw a lot of men get the type of fame I wanted. Now, funnily enough, I never really saw women get that type of fame.
I was just going to ask that. I was going to say, were there peers of your own gender then?
Well, my peers I could never, ever stand face to face to or kind of be on their level. I'm a very small female. I'm barely 5 foot tall. At the time when I was growing up, you had Polystyrene of X-Ray Specs, or I saw Pauline Murray of the band Penetration, you know, these wonderful, wonderful punk women who broke all boundaries, and they lift the glass ceiling in that moment in time. And I looked at Pauline Murray and I thought, God, you are a wonderful woman. You are so original. You're so outstanding and your songs are brilliant. And that gave me a lot of strength. You had Olivia Newton-John, you had Cher, you had Lulu, you had very beautiful model-like women.
X-Ray Specs with Germ-Free Adolescence got to number 19 in 1978. I remember it well. A big influence on an up-and-coming artist by the name of Toyah at that time. And we'll be back to continue our great conversation with Toyah next. Welcome back to the evening show with Jackie Brambles. You join us in the midst of a great conversation with tonight's special guest, Toyah. And we were talking before the break, Toyah, about the scarcity of role models for you as an ambitious up-and-coming artist. So once you made it through yourself and became a known pop star, how did being, somebody else's role model sit with you?
It was an uncomfortable feeling, Jackie, because I was getting about 10,000 letters a week, and I made every effort to read these letters, every single one of them, and try and respond to them. And every letter started with, "My mother hates you."
Oh, my goodness.
Because I've dyed my hair pink. And they were dyeing their hair pink with ink, with felt markers, with paint, everything they should not be putting on their hair. And they were writing me to say that they'd been grounded because of me.
All your fault. How about when you did start to get a little bit comfortable with your success, or at least of being accepted within the music industry? Do you have any particular, memories? Maybe it's the first Top of the Pops or the first time you sort of ran into a fellow musician. Do you have any clear memories of sort of stepping out as a peer, as an equal?
I have two very clear memories. One was my first Old Grey Whistle test, which was such an honor to be invited on. And, people thought I was just too quirky to be involved with certain things. And I got this invite to be on the Old Grey Whistle test. And I was on with Jerry Lee Lewis. And I was 23 at the time, and my management were determined I was not going to meet him. So I snuck away. We were in a studio somewhere in Edinburgh. I snuck away and got into Jerry Lee Lewis's dressing room, and he was absolutely charming. And I talked to him about all the black and white movies I saw him in. As a child, growing up in Birmingham, I saw these movies on a Saturday afternoon on a rainy day in Birmingham at home, and I loved his movies. And he was asking me about why I looked the way I looked, what punk was. So that's a big memory. But my first Top of the Pops was breathtaking. And it was breathtaking not only because of the magnitude of that show, having the world power that it had to break artists and to keep artists sustaining their career.
Yeah.
I knew that everyone I went to school with, every member of my family would be watching that, including all the teachers who thought I was an absolute hopeless cause. So when I went on to this Top of the Pops early in 1981, it was January or February, I think Adamant was number one. Midge Ure was on.
Right.
The artist that sung Shut Up Your Face, Joe Dolce, was on.
Adam and the Ants would have been performing that track, Kings of the Wild Frontier, on Top of the Pops when you, Toyah, would have been performing for the very first time It's a Mystery. So how was that experience?
I was floored, absolutely floored by being in a room with all these people. I'd made a movie with Adamant called Jubilee, but I didn't really know Adamant.
Right.
And he was, by this time, a mega worldwide star. So here I was on the most important stage of my dreams, where Bowie had stood, where Mark Bolan had stood, Alice Cooper, absolutely everyone I have worshipped had been on this program, and suddenly I was on it. And it was an experience because my costume designer couldn't get my costume to me. So by some fluke, I had to wear a dress, and I never wore dresses. So my very first appearance on Top of the Pops, singing It's a Mystery, I looked very petite, pretty and feminine, and I didn't scare anybody. And I think that is why It's a Mystery went to number 4 in the charts, because I looked so appealing. And it was all accidental.
And did you stick with that, or did you sort of try and shake that off?
No, as soon as my costume designer had my really quirky hand-painted geometric costumes ready, they went straight back on. I never, ever felt feminine. I always felt terribly vulnerable if I wore a dress. And in the beginning of my career, I completely covered up.
What often happens, though, when you start to break through as an artist, from what I understand from the conversations that I've had, is sort of one of the first big things that happens is that a big established artist asks you to go on tour with them. Did that happen to you in the early days?
In the early days, I did work with the Glitterati of punk. I used to open or be on the same set as Psychedelic Furs, who were very, very big. I'd be on the same set with Dexys Midnight Runners. So yeah, you did. You got on a multi-bill very, very quickly, and you had to be invited on those multi-bills. You know, people didn't want the kind of artists that didn't have audiences that wouldn't get on. You had to kind of think very much about whether audiences will fight each other back then, because it was a military following. They absolutely religiously followed you and would not let anyone trespass into the territory of your music. So yes, I did work with quite a lot of the big names in punk. I can remember standing in for Hugh Cornwall at the Rainbow with the Stranglers because Hugh had been incarcerated.
Oh my goodness.
Golden brown, texture like sun.
The Stranglers with Golden Brown. Well, you learn something new every time we have one of these great conversations. Who knew that Toyah was temporarily a member of the Stranglers? And what about more recently then, Toyah, in terms of collaborations?
I was supposed to be touring with Hazel O'Connor 3 years ago, but then lockdown happened. And then very sadly, at the beginning of this year, she had a stroke. So I went out on the road with Saffron of Republica and Lena Lovitch in June to raise money so Hazel doesn't have to come back to work. And that was an incredible tour. Absolutely incredible.
She was a fantastic artist, very like you, very, cutting edge, breaking down doors, just a unique sound.
I can remember there was a remarkable time in the late 70s, and it could have been 1980, when both Hazel O'Connor, myself and Kate Bush were in the same room waiting to be auditioned for a film called Breaking Glass. And I can remember Kate, by this time, was already absolutely mega huge because of Wuthering Heights. And Hazel got the film, and she's absolutely superb in that film, but she formulated and arranged all the music in my warehouse, which was called Mayhem.
Did she?
Yeah, because I had a warehouse that fitted 400 people. So Spandau Ballet did their first gig there. Iggy Pop rehearsed his tours there. John Cale rehearsed there. I mean, it really was mayhem.
Wow.
And Hazel formulated all the music for Breaking Glass there. So we all go back a really long time.
You drink your coffee and
Hazel O'Connor from 1981. That's Will You from Breaking Glass. Well, Toyah, I'll have whatever you're on because you seem to have endless energy, which I have to say is hugely inspiring. Enjoy the last couple of summer festivals in Newark and Durham, followed by a quick 2 or 3 weeks off and preparing for Toyah and Robert's Sunday Lunch Rock Party, kicking off its UK tour in Robert's childhood turf of Wimborne and ending a month later in your childhood home turf of Birmingham.
Yeah, it's non-stop. It's a 7-day week for us now. Thank you very much.
That's Toyah. And by the way, if you've never seen Toyah and Robert in action in their kitchen, that is definitely something to find online and absorb if you're feeling a tad weary and middle-aged. That'll soon shake it out of you.